David Frazier, City Manager.
Ed Sullivan, City Attorney.
Is the draft of a new policy with changes that provide a more financially accountability for the city, and also some procedural help for you as well. And it also answers some questions such as, how do I schedule my conference travel? And other questions that you've raised throughout the year. Next is a chart showing the 2010 domestic per diem rates for Oregon, which is the maximum rates that are allowed for hotel, meals, incidental expenses, et cetera. And next is a matrix for your information. It's a comparison of mayor and council compensation for various cities throughout Oregon. Also included is a page from our own budget book on city commission expenditures, with the commissioner budgeted expense amounts highlighted. Also included is a policy from the city of Lake Oswego, just for comparison purposes. And lastly, just for your own information to look over at home or wherever, is a report that was compiled by the League of Oregon Cities in 2006. Even though it's a little old, it still gives you an idea of what the compensation and stipends, benefits, et cetera, for elected officials are in a lot of cities around the state. So it's just for your information. But so therefore, you have all that information, and since it's your policy, you are free to move forward and review it and discuss it, and we're here to answer any questions. And Jim Leffler has some input also on HR type questions related to expenses and so forth.
Great.
So,
Do you want to talk first?
Well, no, actually, I'm here.
Just to
Yes.
respond.
okay.
Wait, Commissioner, or Daphne.
Oh, I was just wondering how to open that bottom document from the League of Oregon Cities.
Is it,
Scroll
is
up.
it,
Okay, duh. Okay, thank you.
Got it?
Yep. Sorry.
Okay, so I suppose that if you don't have questions right off the top, then it's the draft document to look at. It's just as I was thinking, we don't get to charge for those duties that we all do together. And I know we agreed informally years ago that we normally, when we travel to things in the city, we don't necessarily budget for those, but we're permitted to. And almost everything else that isn't sort of listed as a liaison responsibility that we do has to have prior approval. So, for instance, I know each of us, when we go to a conference, that makes sure that we're all informed and that no one has any problem with that kind of expenditure. So does anyone have any questions about either things you've charged or haven't charged, or the way that are appropriate to put on our expense accounts?
I do, but how do I get
I guess I have one.
Doug?
On the domestic per diem rates that you have here, GSA, U.S. General Services Administration, is this the same thing that the IRS gives for general towns and cities?
yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And so, does our current policy state that you go by this guideline, which changes periodically?
Yes, and in fact, we We use the city of Portland, I think it's highlighted on the form there. We use those as our standard rates.
For where?
For when you, if you were to go somewhere for, and you needed a hotel and meals and so forth, those are the amounts that are, the top end amount that's allowed. If it's in the northwest area, if it's like Washington DC and the rates are obviously more, but this is for domestic Oregon per diem rates. Does that answer your question?
Well, I would have thought that if you're going to Ashland, then you'd pay 88. You saying you're 120 no matter where you are?
Up to,
Actually, I didn't think we ever did per diem. Is that in the?
No, this is the maximum lodging.
Oh, maximum lodge?
Yeah, excuse me, I'm looking at maximum
Oh,
lodging.
sorry.
yeah.
Well, we don't have maximum lodging in our, do we?
We haven't, have we?
No, we don't have maximum lodging.
Because you always book everything.
Right, and generally, we get conference rates because it's a conference you're going to, and there haven't been, this is why we need a policy. We need to put things in place so that we have standards and parameters from which to follow. Lodging on the current policy, it just says hotel accommodations should be appropriate for the purpose of the trip. That's
Just a little bit vague.
Yeah.
What's appropriate for one person may not be appropriate for someone else.
one of those.
Where does it say that? Oh, yeah, there it is.
That's
This
on
sentence,
your-
Yep, the new one.
And then, of course, it asks for all receipts for all lodging costs shall be obtained, and it discusses if you bring a family member and so forth.
I guess I prefer one that was actually set to the, it's listed as Oregon FY 10, but GSA, it's U.S. General Services Administration. That is the same thing that the IRS uses for
Yes,
its
US
claims?
General. Yes, in fact, I didn't include it, but I do have a list of, I polled many cities in Oregon, and most of them use the same schedule.
Yeah. So
fine.
why would we use, why wouldn't we use this as a basis? I mean, if you went to someplace for some reason that was more expensive, and there was a specific reason for it, we probably as a commission could approve for somebody doing so, but why don't we use this as the maximum?
Why
Or
are-
is it template?
Why are we? Is that your?
Why don't we?
was
Oh,
his
that's
question.
what we're trying to put in place.
Oh, okay.
That's
Oh.
what the policy is recommending,
Right.
the draft policy. Let's see, it's on page,
Yeah, I'm looking at that on page 2. But where does it say, under lodging? Where was the families of a room? Travel authorization
I'm
form.
mixed up on my pages here. Lodging.
I don't see it. It's not in there. Washington DC, sometimes, I usually share a room with someone, so, another delegate, so normally we get it under that, but Washington DC sometimes it's a little hard to get it 120. But that's the only place that I've traveled in city business that isn't. And normally by sharing, you can do it.
You're right, it doesn't actually state that
it
here,
doesn't.
although that's kind of the guideline that we use in our,
Well, I would
in our
actually
accounting
I
department.
would make it formal.
But you would like to add that? Okay.
Is it,
Or
do
is
we have
that
head nods
something
around
that's-
to add that before we adopt? Okay. I like that too, as a guideline. I think it's important to have that. So, for instance, so when we travel to South Fork board meetings, we get to take that, because not all of the commissioners do it, and it's actually a little distance. For instance, but if we schedule a dinner, for instance, with a constituent, that's not appropriate, right? Because that's not really performing our duty.
That would be into the meals section, which is the next section.
Meals, okay, let's look at meals.
So I'm clear on the lodging, Mayor. You mentioned South Fork. So if you're on South Fork business, then South Fork's.
South Fork pays,
Yeah.
except for the mileage, because the mileage is performing
Our
from
duty.
our house, it's our duty, so we get to deduct that. Meals, let's go to meals, where is that? Number,
Letter C.
oh, thank you, there it is.
And-
Business-related meals including tips reimbursed, the rates.
So,
So that's essentially the meals that we get to deduct are those during, at conferences or like Metro meeting or something like that, where we were,
If you have a conference that includes the cost of your meals,
Right.
then
Right. Then
that's
you'll-
included with the conference
Exactly.
cost, and you wouldn't be reimbursed more. But if you were en route and you needed to stop, for a meal along the way, or however that would work, those would be reimbursable at the current IRS meal rates. And that's what we should be saying up there in the lodging section, something very similar to
yes,
that.
yes.
that makes sense, I think. Yeah, because meal expenses are pretty much related to that, to our job-related things. And other miscellaneous, okay, phone and fax. We used to all get fax reimbursed in the days before.
Who uses a fax?
I don't-
Facts.
People anymore.
Run away.
Probably it's okay to have it in there, but it's, no one, in fact, the city used to give fax machines to the commissioners. Did you all know that?
No.
In the old days?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Excuse me,
Before-
loan them
that
while they
old.
were on.
Loan, I mean, yes, loan, just like the laptop. So you had it. I didn't have one, but everybody else did, I guess.
The droid reimbursement.
Yeah,
Since we're still in transition with fax machines, we'll keep it in there for
yeah
now.
I think
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
Like the
great.
transition
Yeah,
from
yeah.
pagers to,
Yeah.
what's a
It's
pager?
exactly the same thing. Okay, and then tips do get included, gratuities not reimbursable individually. Yeah, and then alcoholic beverages, of course, not ever. Okay, any other questions about this or things that you've declared? Daphne? Sorry, I'm not on that one. There, go ahead.
So I'm supportive of everything we've been talking about so far, but the lodging, so if the conference is, like, for instance, that year I went to Chicago, and if it's over 120, then you make an exception? Or
According
DC?
to the current IRS rates for that area.
Okay, for that, okay.
What you have here is just the ones for Oregon.
Okay, got it.
Should be-
And I see that 7 days after the end of the month, you want everything filed instead of once a year. Just kidding.
Actually, there's parts of the policy I don't think we've been following.
Yeah,
very
yeah,
much,
right.
so-
I think that's a very difficult one to, I mean, sometimes you don't get all
Pretty
that
sure.
that's all of
Yeah, that's right.
$5.
If we could have
You
it,
might be waiting for your, so why don't we?
yes,
I
for a
think
conference, it's,
The finance department's not here, they may have a reason for that, but I think you might want to at least wait till your credit card bill comes to your house.
That's right.
Before
Some of
you
it.
bring it to us. So we could change that to 45 days or 60 days, and I think it
60
would
days.
be fine.
30 is probably okay, but.
Well, that depends on your credit, but, I mean, it could be more than
Oh,
a month
right.
with a credit card.
You know, you're right,
Yeah.
it could, especially if you're
Yes.
on the cusp of the time.
So I would have no problem with 60 days.
I
Okay.
mostly, yeah, that works. I mostly just wanted to clarify on what meetings. So I consider as part of my elected duty to come to city commission, work sessions, and urban renewal. So any other meetings, when I go to county meetings, South Fork, Metro, whatever, those
Yeah.
are.
Budget
I just
meeting-
wanted to make sure when the.
Yeah, but budget meetings you can't deduct, metro
Or budget,
enhancement,
yes.
OCCIT.
Yeah.
I think that might be it. I think everything else we can because we don't serve as 5 people together, and I think that's sort of the, so when we go to MPAC, when we go to Tourism
Right.
Council, meeting that the county might call.
C4.
Most everything we're talking about really seems to be where we don't get reimbursed is within Oregon City. I don't know why we couldn't do that. Any meetings within the city limits.
That we should, no, I think we should.
I think we should
That's-
get, I
yeah.
like the policy, if it's not
Right.
in our elected duty and all 5 of us, then I think that we should be able to bill for it. After all, we
like South
don't
Fork.
get a stipend or anything, at least we could do is get our,
And now that you brought up the word stipend, I know you're not going to do this, but I still want to say it. Yeah, I get the pleasure of reviewing these and signing off on them. And everyone likes to review their boss's expense reports, I'm sure. So, like, in a perfect world for me, I would just have a expense reimbursement stipend of a certain amount every month, unless you're doing out-of-city travel, like at a conference, which then we would just reimburse you for the actual expenses that you incur. And then if we had an average and you were comfortable with that data, whatever the average was, and this would be for, as far as I'm concerned, it could be for meals, travel, all of it. We could lump it together and figure out what it is. And I knew you wouldn't do it, but I still want
Well,
to
no, the
say-
reason is because our attorney, I've asked that before. No, and I.
Too
and-
close to the charter?
Yeah,
Okay.
it is. It's too close to the charter, and that's really what I have wanted. But actually, when I began keeping my mileage, and I get reimbursed for transportation for, most days back and forth to Metro, it's about $100 a month, I think. But it's actual, I can prove.
Well, I understand Ed's objection. This is something we were able to do in other cities, but the charter was worded differently. It's such a small
Ours
amount.
is-
The accounting time that I spend and other people spend monitoring it is more than it costs to just do it a different way. But you also have to respect whatever limitations there are.
Yeah, because we've discussed this before, because many cities well, actually, Lake Oswego, I believe, just got audited because they do, I think $100 a month for the mayor and $50 for the commissioners or something like councilors or something like that. And they didn't have to keep mileage records, and it was sort of like
That's
being a
an IRS
contractor.
problem.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So they have changed their policy, I guess. Doug, you're next.
Oh, I already spoke.
Okay, Jim.
Wanted to clarify two things. One was, I thought I heard, and just wanted to confirm that scheduling a meal with a constituent is not considered business?
No.
Okay, I disagree with that. I think it should be a business expense. I've had lunches with my fellow commissioners that we mutually have, considered business, to talk about something on an agenda, to talk about a policy proposal. I don't see why any benefit I gain from discussion over lunch with a constituent or someone who wants to do business in the city should not be considered as valuable that merits sitting down with that constituent over coffee or lunch or something. I think that's one of the most valuable settings that I've been able to interact with the public on, and I certainly consider that business city business, because it's relating to policies. I mean, where the commission is here to formulate policy, and when I've made presentations or made arguments on this commission or on the Urban Renewal Commission, they almost always have been informed by discussions I've had with constituents, either by telephone or sitting down over coffee, over lunch, or over dinner in person. I think that's city business, and I would have an objection to that not being considered business.
I guess my response to that, because I had to deal with that early on since we didn't have meeting places in the old city hall, and so my office was all the coffee shops of the community, and and we don't want to cut off citizen access, because I think that's a really important piece of our job, but we have choices. We have choices about where we go. We don't have to choose dinner. We don't have to choose lunch, and I never have. I choose coffee because it's so easily done. Now, of course, we have a meeting room, and it's very, very easy to schedule here. So I still do use the coffee shops because it's a habit of mine, but it's wonderful now that we have a meeting room. We don't have to schedule lunches and dinners. So I think because you have a choice, that to choose prudently, I think as far as money is really important in business hours.
Yeah,
next is Doug.
I'm in agreement.
Okay.
I'm in agreement, too.
Is there any other?
But
Yeah, go ahead.
Did you have two parts to this? So one is having lunch with constituents and one is having lunch with fellow commissioners to charge off? Because I feel like the same option exists. If I'm going to talk to Mayor Norris or Doug or Rocky or you, I don't have to have lunch to do it. It's easier to go to the coffee shop to talk. It's a little more pleasant, but we don't have to do that. So I don't feel right about writing that off either.
And you're going to, I've never understood it either. Because you're going to have lunch anyway. You're going to have dinner anyway. So I don't get it. I don't understand it.
Okay, any more questions about
There's a big window of what's business related, what that means. So if you want to refine whatever those examples are, you can, or you can leave it up to. Right now, you guys have a very different view because some of you don't submit anything it doesn't look like. In the last few months anyway. Others submit regularly. Some include, things, and others don't include anything. So if you want to leave that to individual interpretation, that's okay with me, but if you want to clarify what you mean by business related, it might help.
Where are you?
The definition of that, because I'm
because Jim's got a very different view from some of the others, and I just want to know. I'd rather not have to settle that
I'll give an example of one expense I submitted during the urban reserve discussions we had last year. My former employer, who was a planner, and his clients who wanted to include the what they were calling the Clackamas Heights area, way north of here, almost to the river. They wanted that in the urban reserve area. I went out to lunch for them. I considered that city business, and I reimbursed that. That to me is completely city business.
Well, again, I guess.
I'm not comfortable with that.
I'm not either because you had choice.
And if I might,
Yes.
without hitting the same.
Sure.
It feels like it's long.
I think how you interact with people in a meeting room is very different on how you interact with people when you're sitting down eating and drinking and so forth. And my preference is, under those situations, is to have a more, I'll call it a formal setting, one that's not tied to the dinners and so forth, where people are feeling good because they're eating something they want to eat or something of that nature.
Or who pays?
Yeah,
I think that's
it's a lot.
extremely awkward about who
I
pays.
do too. I think that's really awkward.
It puts us in an uncomfortable position, I think.
So, Mayor Norris, just to clarify, when you and I had coffee last year up at that place off Molalla, almost to OC Point, but not quite, I can't remember the name of the cafe anymore.
Cafe Jolie.
You indicated that you were going to charge that as city business, and you used the words city business. Are you changing your position now?
I believe I was teasing because I don't think I've ever
Yeah,
put down mileage or.
I've never either.
Certainly don't put down expenses for the coffee ever. It would only be the mileage, and I don't think I'd ever do that. I'd have to go back and look, but it's not my practice. So the clarification that you were talking about clarifying what a business expense is.
Under the meal section at least, so that there's not confusion about whether we're going to.
Okay, does anyone have suggestions about what business-related expenses I think would be related to? Oh, do you have some words from Lake Oswego?
Well, I think what this section is talking about, for instance, if you're on a business a conference or you're traveling, you've got lodging, you've got meals, you've got tips, and that sort of thing. I don't think this is necessarily related to, having
Travel
lunch at the,
expenses.
while you review your packets or whatever. I think this is just conference-type meals.
was-
Under item D, other miscellaneous expenses.
okay.
I think if you
That's
want
travel
to,
expenses,
if you
that's
want to
right.
define business expenses there, you could go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, whatever, and make your definitions there.
Okay, that's a good place for it. Maybe.
Are you thinking something that says general business expenses
Do not
will be
include.
considered for reimbursement that are required for the performance of your duties? That sort of thing? Because
I mean, that's part of the
I mean, you
definition.
guys keep talking about the option, if it's optional, then it's not, that
Should
in
ask
your
you.
view, that's something you feel strongly about, but I just think if it's a cost you actually incur from doing your job, we want to make sure, I think we should reimburse you for it.
But it still becomes a definitional thing. You want to make clear that we all have the same definition. And
Yes.
And I'll be sitting there saying, well, was it required for the,
Right. Well, I think when in doubt, we question. I mean, so we could certainly start out with the definition of what being on city business means, maybe, but if we have a question, or if the city manager has a question to whom we submit our statements, then you ought to feel free to say, does this fit the guideline? I mean, our records are, of course, open to public inspection as well, so we want to make sure, I mean, I'm always really conscious that this is a public document when I fill out my expense report, because I know.
it doesn't look like anyone's abusing it. Just, I'll say that much, too. It's a very small amount, and everyone provides receipts. So, I mean, it's not something that's being abused right now.
Okay. Well, after the discussion, maybe the guidelines will help. Nancy, do you have something?
Just that the whole, in all of 2009-10, the total amount was only $3,155. So, and that's all of you. with conferences, expense reports. So it's a very small amount. And the allotted amount was 3,000 plus 7,200, so 10,200. So you're
within
well under
within
as far
our-
as what's been budgeted
That total amount, though, is a total among us all, right?
The five.
Yeah,
for travel and
right.
Meals and.
yeah, and expenses.
Stephen.
Daphne?
Well, I think that one of the reasons we're doing this is to tighten up the language. This has been, over 10 years old. So I would prefer to see that, that it would be an exception, that we would not be paying, we would not be reimbursed to have lunch with each other, regardless of city business, because we have options that way, and with constituents, because like I was saying, it feels a little bit like lobbying, or you're getting, you get to get listened to a little bit more if I buy you lunch, and I'd rather not go there. So I think that the meals should be with a conference or out of town or something like that. So I'd like to see that tightened up.
Do you guys want to have a crack at putting that together?
Well, I've
maybe?
got an idea. I hate to draft from the floor.
Yeah, I know. We have time on this.
We have attorneys here to make that hard. But maybe we could say all out-of-town business-related meals.
Well, Clackamas
Oh,
dinners.
yeah.
And, I mean,
Okay.
there are things that
There's
do
an exception.
occur here. And
I think we
we have the
probably better-
chamber event. I think the city automatically covers it. We don't,
Yeah.
that's kind of a pass-through, but.
Yeah.
City dinners, too.
City,
Okay,
right.
well, we can take a crack at it.
Why don't you take a crack at it and bring it back before we
We will do that.
discuss it, or go on. Okay, anybody?
Oh, I want to clarify something on the meals before we go.
Yes.
As all of you know, I think every 6 weeks or so I schedule a lunch with you. I try to get you at lunch because that's many times the only time we're all available, both of us. I schedule these one-on-one meetings with you, and we almost invariably spend sometimes as much as 3 hours talking about city business over a lunch. I pay for that on my city credit card because we're clearly doing city business. And I want to make sure that you understand that that's still something we'll be doing unless you want us to not do that.
Now, this is for the commission, isn't it?
This is just for the commission, not for you.
Yeah, and that's true.
You want us to write some guidelines for you, too?
You can if you want. Actually, I already have some. But I'm an employee, and I'm trying to basically keep in touch with our commissioners, so I know.
Yeah, that's great.
how
Every
to
city
manage our
manager I
cities.
know of
Okay.
does it that way, so.
Okay, so if I'm taking your time, you can, don't worry about me not paying for your lunch.
Great. Okay, any other questions or comments on this?
I have two, actually.
Oh, Jim.
One of them was regarding alcohol being prohibited. But if you're on city business, say at a conference, and you order a meal that includes alcohol, and you get a receipt that delineates what's food and what's the beer, can you submit a reimbursement for those parts of the bill that weren't the beer?
Of course, just circle it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
The second point, just reflecting on the points that have been made previously, I guess I need some guidance on this from the city manager and my fellow commissioners, because given my struggle with organizational issues, that's pretty well known. I'm often very, very tardy in submitting expenses, and I still have some to submit. And,
Of 2009.
yeah, I do,
We have a deadline on that.
yeah.
That's way late.
Well, I submitted it by the deadline, but I got some corrections from Nancy on some of it. But I assume that, like any budgetary process, unspent funds roll over in the budget to the next fiscal year.
Well, how I'd like to do this is if this was an expense incurred before this new policy is adopted, as long as the expense date didn't happen, it happened before the new policy was adopted, then we'll deal with it like we always have.
Okay.
Now, from what I can tell, in the last whole 4 months, as I said, there's a lot of variation in how you prepare these and whether you submit at all. I know some of you travel and don't submit anything. I'm pretty sure of that. Some of you submit more than others and different things than others do. So I'm glad we're having this discussion because it's kind of clearing up the ambiguity. We may see a little bit more uniformity in the submissions. But I think if it was incurred before tonight's policy, we shouldn't look at that.
You
So
said 2009, though.
that's going back a
bit.
ways. I don't know what was in the budget back then. So,
Same.
or how
Well-
big
It's
it
the
is.
same.
It's the same
Yeah.
budget.
Okay, all right.
So that's a question. And the other issue is when I did submit last time or the previous time, I did include requests and was in fact reimbursed for meals and coffees with fellow commissioners and with constituents based on my assumption from these, like my coffee with the mayor, that was the policy and I could do that. So now I'm getting a different signal, and I'm a little troubled by that, just in the fact that because I was operating under an expectation that I thought was correct at the time, I'm a little nervous about submitting reimbursement requests now that included meals with constituents, and I think I should be able to do that because I was operating under the expectation of what I thought the policy and practice was of the commission.
I think that's what the city manager said, that anything you submit today, tomorrow, and until the
And,
meeting, until it's
in
adopted.
fairness to everyone here,
walks under
this
the
is
old-
pretty ambiguous, Jim. I can see
Yeah.
where
Yeah.
either
Yeah.
interpretation would be perfectly reasonable.
Oh.
And so what we're going to do is just, whatever
Clean
you
it up.
submit, if you've got receipts, we're going to treat it like we always have. One of the other things I noticed, and Nancy may be able to confirm this, but I'm pretty sure that not only were these deadlines, there wasn't a whole lot of attention paid to that. I'm not sure that there was much attention paid to the manager being timely in signing them or bringing them back to you if they exceeded some of the limitations. I think it's $150 in the old policy per item or something like that. I'm not sure we were doing, any of us doing a very good job of monitoring that. So that's what I'm hoping to get back on track here, change that 30 or 7 days to 60 so you have time. Everyone's in agreement with that. And
Yeah.
so I'd like to have the policy fit our behavior, or if behavior fit our policy, preferably both.
I have submitted quite a few where the item, so for instance, a hotel in Washington D.C. for 4 days or whatever it is I go for a JPAC trip is over $120, and no one's ever said anything about that. So,
No, it would be for that area.
Yeah,
the-
so Washington
the
D.C.
domestic area.
well, no, I believe our current policy says. Well, maybe I did read it differently.
No, it just basically says hotel accommodations should be appropriate for the purpose of the trip.
No, it says the city manager will approve and authorize reimbursement of commission expense rates that do not exceed $35 per item.
Oh, I see what
And
you're saying.
$150 for the month.
Okay.
So I'd like to see that actually. Does that?
If you look at the draft policy and compare that
Yeah, that's what I
to
was
the
thinking.
old one, I think you should change that too, because I don't
Is it
really
still in
want to
there?
come, if you go to a conference in New York City or Chicago or
Washington,
any of
D.C.
those cities, I mean, the 14% room tax in Minneapolis is enough to push you over the,
Yes.
over that rate.
Exactly.
And I really don't want to be putting that on the agenda and bringing it back and talking.
Yeah.
I mean, it's kind of silly. We don't do that for our own employees. That's a very expensive process, so I think we should just make that language more reasonable so I can approve these expenses when you go out of town.
And Mayor, to add to that, in the new policy, the draft,
It's blanks.
it says other expense reimbursement. So that doesn't mean your hotel lodging. Your hotel lodging is under the section of the B,
Okay.
item B,
Okay.
lodging. So that doesn't necessarily include your other expenses.
And you're going to be more specific
It's a-
on the language there.
On
Yeah,
this
we're
one,
just,
yeah.
we're clarifying that. I mean, you couldn't possibly go on
okay.
on a conference and not and spend less than $150 a month. I
Right.
mean, it's if you were going to Washington D.C. or something like that. But perhaps you want to look at other options there, such as dividing out a certain, the total amount in the budget divided by 5, and each of you taking a portion so that you know that that's your allotment.
Except the mayor should have. Except the mayor should have more.
I would agree.
but-
I would agree. But,
Well,
I mean,
and
there's just
also-
other options for looking at that.
It depends on what committees you are. I mean, if most of the committees I serve on are right in Oregon City, so that that's completely different from going to Portland
Okay.
every day for a meeting or
Yeah.
So I don't know that that's the best way to do it either.
And the mayor's position
Right.
is going to use more.
Way more.
Whoever's in that chair is going to use more,
Yep.
so.
Always. That has not been a problem in the past, I don't think, the total amount. I don't think we've ever exceeded that. We may want to look at it if we, I don't expect we will. So we're not changing the practices. So I don't know that that's a problem that needs to be solved. What do you think?
Or we could just tweak the wording there. The city manager will approve and authorize reimbursement for the commission expense statements, and then say something according to a distribution among the commissioners, or don't have a specific amount, but so that it doesn't go over the budgeted amount.
Well, then why don't you just say that? That does not exceed total budgeted amount.
Yeah.
I don't think I like it delineated because certain, like Rocky said, certain commissioners may have more expenses in a certain area.
How do I get on the floor again?
Daphne.
Yeah, and is some of us have more time to go to conferences or are available to do more of that. You hate to see get penalized if you are able to go. So
That's
but
true, too.
we usually try to ask
Yeah.
approval of everybody.
Yep.
I think everybody, through my ears, everyone's been pretty open about that. And Jim,
Oh, no, that
you're
was
on.
from my last
yeah.
comment.
Okay, any other comments on this item?
May I make one more
Yes, you
comment?
may.
I don't know if you wanted to discuss this or not, but it might be simpler for, say, the mayor to have a purchasing card or a Visa card to use for certain expenses. I don't know if that's something you want to talk about or not, but just the convenience, the administrative, it takes less administrative time to process those kind of things, but I'm just going to throw it out there as an option.
Sounds like a good idea.
I think my biggest expenses are travel. It's mileage, and that wouldn't help me. I feel yes, of course, I put on some receptions at our home, which we've all participated in, but the reimbursement's so easy, and I think the administration is simple. I think you all know that I really think that that we, all of us, need to provide compensation in the charter for mayor and commissioners. That's an eventual goal. I think the time isn't right with the economic climate right now, but I think that's easier way to solve it.
Yes,
But I don't see the need. I don't see the need for a credit card. Doug,
I think Jim. Are you still on?
he's on.
No, that was
I-
my last
I-
Okay.
Nancy's busy writing.
I'm just kind of thinking out loud here. The benefit to having actually a card for this specific purpose is that if at any point your expenses has to be looked at by the public, and you've been putting things on your personal Visa card, that all gets exposed too, I presume.
Yeah.
So that would be the benefit I would see. Not that the accounting is so difficult. Just the same way we prefer to use our own laptops. The city's laptops as opposed to our own personal computers. It seems the same thing would apply to charge cards. But
Right now everything's open to the public.
I think the only thing that would be open would be the submitted
so they would never have to look at your
submitted
Visa
receipts that
cards.
processed through finance.
just-
They're not
If you-
going to have
if you
access to
turn
your
in
personal credit card.
Your
The whole-
credit card
Your monthly
statement.
statement, that's public record.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But if you just turn in the receipt,
Just
you're
turn in
fine.
the receipt, you're fine.
Okay.
And that's actually what we prefer, the receipt.
Okay.
I think right now I would prefer that as well. I wish
Yeah,
I'd started.
that's fine.
I only started keeping mileage. I think my 5th year, and I wish I'd done it the first 4 because I've paid to do this job, but that would be cleared up in another way, I think.
Yep.
Okay, let's move on to the next item then on the discussion agenda, and that is the charter revision timeline. This is the one that Jim, I think this is yours, where, the attorney memo, we wanted, I think, discuss what we wanted to do with your proposal for a charter amendment that we had talked about at our goal-setting session.
Well, I'd like to clarify that.
Okay.
My issue was the city attorney charter amendment.
Right.
Back in, I think it may have been during the goals and objectives in the retreat, we had a discussion about that issue, and I think during that issue, someone else, may have been Doug, raised the issue of a broader charter amendment process because the charter had a lot of baggage, and that that it would be helpful to, and there was back and forth about to do one issue, two issues, or a number of issues. This issue on the broader charter revision, that's not been my issue.
Okay, well, I think this issue, though, well, we can talk about that, but I think isn't that the same issue? I think the issue here is, city attorney appointment, okay. Okay, charter revision. As we were talking about ahead of time, there was a committee before I was elected, I know, that actually I sat in on, where all the cleanup of the charter was discussed. And it wasn't really anything very substantive, except when we got into the parks area. But it was, the language is archaic. And so I know that Bob Bailey, who was not a commissioner at the time, had submitted after the discussion of the committee a cleanup of the charter. So that was one. And I think he may have modeled that off of the League of Oregon Cities template. And then our attorney, Ed Sullivan, put together two. So we have two that we probably could look at. I think, again, in the 8 years that I've served, the revision of the charter has been so much less important than all of the other huge issues that we've dealt with. So that's why it's not been done. And at the time, I thought that the City Commission had a good process and put together a citizens committee made up of people that had been involved in various aspects of the city that would understand what the charter meant. And everybody, I think there was Doug, I think actually there must have been two city commissioners, and maybe including the mayor at the time, that sat on that as well with the attorney to, I think you were there at all, yeah, I'm pretty sure you were, because I remember that. Yeah, and chewed on the changes that needed to be made. And I believe at the time, which I think I would still suggest, is that the substantive issues might require a different kind of hearing than the just language updates. So, what's anybody want to do with this? I think it's something that you could revisit during goal setting. It's again not an urgent matter. We live under the precepts of the charter, and I think we know which ones we bump up against.
Mayor, if I might.
Sure, David.
I know that one of the big issues is the water rate rollback, and I also understand that based on the history and some of my discussions with some of you and with Mr. Sullivan, that there's some judicial interpretation of that that's probably going to be forthcoming and needs to be made. And so,
but that's a specific provision.
Right.
Yeah.
But to the extent that was a concern about revising, how do you look at the charter, that would at least streamline some of the issues that people might be discussing. If that were resolved, is what I'm.
Well, see, that's what I think.
Resolve it either way.
That there are really two issues here. One is the charter cleanup generally. The mayor for instance, and other issues that are very grating. And then substantive issues, which, again, on a ballot, I would pull out as separate, I think, things for citizens to consider, like a water rate rollback. That might be even a different election, because that's a pretty comprehensive need to understand a technical issue. Right. And then, city attorney appointment, that's a charter amendment. And there may be a number of others that are truly changes, not just language changes. So,
I would say that
Doug.
Anything in the charter that was a citizen initiative that created it would have to be dealt with separately.
I agree.
Because our revision to the charter would have to go to the vote of the people as well. Mm-hmm. And what you don't want to include in there is changes in something that was initially citizen-driven, because,
That's what I'm saying.
yeah. And
That's what I
so,
meant.
Yeah,
Yeah. Like water rate rollback,
right.
Garbage plans.
Garbage plants, yeah.
right?
Right.
Incinerators,
Right. As opposed to gasification plants.
and which are also incinerators.
Okay, I'm not hearing any interest in really moving this forward, like, right now.
Yeah, I think
me.
it's something for a new commission to take a look at, actually.
I agree. Okay, well then, let's move along. I see no objections to the city attorney appointment discussion. So, Jim, want to lead that one?
No, I don't.
No, do you
I
want
sent
to
out
lead that?
I sent out an email this afternoon.
didn't see that.
I wanted a discussion on this when I thought we were going to put this on the ballot this fall. I don't really see the purpose of discussing it since we're not putting it on the ballot this fall. Doug made the suggestion that it be on the work session
Right.
tonight.
Right.
So I will allow Doug to lead the discussion if you want to.
And so will
Or
I.
else,
Sure, where do we want to go with it? Doug, do you want to?
Yeah, I will make a comment. I wonder if, and there were some specific things that resulted to this discussion about the appointment to the employment by the city attorney. I am wondering if, in terms of commissioner direction to the attorney, if there's just simply some kind of a formal policy we can adopt. I mean, basically, we're agreed that if a majority of the commission wishes the attorney to pursue an issue, the issue will be pursued irrespective of how the city manager feels about it. I guess that's the best way to phrase it. But whether the concerns we've had can just as easily be dealt with in terms of a formal policy.
Madam Mayor, that's the way I've been treating requests in any event. Either the manager or a majority of the commission. And if you want me to change that, I think you need to talk with the manager and you need to figure out whether you want to change the structure.
Yeah, I think that's one. And I think, in my mind, there are several issues around city attorney. And one that's persisted, actually before my time, left by the city manager under whom I came, which was Brian Nakamura, was having an in-house attorney. And I know that some of us were on the commission when we looked at it with Larry as well. And at the time, we had no space. It was basically, it was there's a money and a space issue. But I wonder if it's time for an in-house attorney. And I understand that it's a different discussion than who appoints. But also, I guess, I would love David, I think appreciate David having a chance to talk with us about this, whether it's tonight or in the future, about attorney issues, because I have no objection to doing this as long as it's done, again, thoughtfully, and I guess out of respect to the newness of David. He hasn't made any appointments, and he doesn't know what problem it's trying to solve, and I think to have that discussion or have your response to that or have some time for you, I'm just wondering again, well, I guess we already have time because we don't have an election that it can to go on, but I think the attorney issues are multiple. So it's when, maybe it's again a policy when, I don't know that we need to have everything in policy, but maybe an understanding of the use of attorney time. Do we need an in-house attorney? When, how, where can we afford it? Does it work? And then who do we want the attorney to work for? Now, as I recall, that that one of the issues that you had brought up, Jim, earlier was that you perceived that there was a barrier between that the city manager was able to say to the attorney, don't communicate or something, and that with the free flow of information was one of the incentives for doing it. But I think to be able to understand maybe how David's experience in the past works with the city attorney would be helpful.
Well, I think that you raised a lot of issues there. the principal one for me would be the efficient use of our city attorney office, whether it's in-house or external. Obviously, when you have a contract city attorney, there's benefits from that. One of those is sometimes you get more specialization. In fact, you always do, because the attorneys, this particular firm that represents us now has a number of folks that are sort of targeted experts. So in some sense, you get a more efficient service because it can be assigned to one of the experts in that particular field. We had, I'll give you some examples. We had contract attorneys in 2 of the 3 other cities I worked in. The last city I worked in Grants Pass, we had a city attorney in-house. We had a deputy city attorney in-house. And we had just a lucky find of getting a retired federal judge to do property right-of-way acquisition, things like that for us. He was really, really bright and helped educate our whole legal team. But we essentially had our own little 2.5-person law firm inside the organization, and they worked right alongside all of our other staff. They came to all of our department head meetings. They were a member of the executive team like anyone else. And so any one of those can work. I would say that for me to make a recommendation and be comfortable here as far as how efficient it's going to be, at some point, it's just like when you decide to create, for example, a city engineer. When the engineering fees get up around $300,000 to $400,000 a year, that's when I would probably start looking at, okay, we need to have our own internal engineer, city engineer, depending on whether or not that generalist city engineer can do all those specialized things or save us money on the specialized things that have to be done, or monitor what things are assigned out. So I guess my point is that even if we had internal city attorney in-house, we would still need to go out for land use, probably have to go out for labor.
Okay.
So there's going to be some going out no matter what, unless we create our own law firm and hire a bunch of people we can't afford. So I think it's kind of a horse apiece right now. If I might, though, I'll keep an eye on that, and obviously the expenses for the service that we're getting is going to be something you look at every year in your budget process, and if it starts to get pretty high, I may do some analysis, probably have some discussions. There's probably things the firm and I can discuss each year that may save the city money in the year moving forward, some things that are maybe not necessary for them to be involved in as much. So it's sort of like a management challenge either way. You do it. And right now, I don't have a definitive opinion for you.
Thank you. Doug?
I guess I suppose when it was actually Mr. Patterson who was actually making that recommendation, I think very early on when he came. And
Nakamura did too.
And so many of the issues we face are in fact land use issues, and I think we'd be hard-pressed to find better representation, that maybe impossible to find better representation in that particular area, that unless a certain attorney was willing to be an in-house attorney, I don't think that's likely.
Well, I think we actually did talk about. I think actually we talked with the firm about that again during.
But see that unique situation where you have your contract city attorney who happens to be particularly well versed in land use. It cuts in favor of not
of a contractor
creating an in-house. Now, Ed may eventually retire. Someday.
No, none of us believe that.
Or we may eventually be in a situation where we don't have a contract city attorney that's giving us exceptional value because of land use experience.
Right.
And now if that's the case and we start seeing our outside land use bill go up, then we've got a different analysis.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. But right now it's not jumping out, but it's very hard to say in 4 months that I haven't given it a thorough review, but it is something to keep an eye on in future budget process.
Okay. Then from the discussion, may I suggest that this isn't something that we need to do right away either, or that maybe hold this over to the commission goal setting in January for
Sounds reasonable to me.
putting a timeline on it? Okay. Next, city manager's report.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I have here a memo from David Evans, or actually the memo is from Tony Conkle, a memo to Tony from David Evans Associates, and it's about the extra work that we had done on the Cove site to enhance the shoreline there. And it's design work and advice from David Evans Associates about how the current Cove plan as it exists could be modified to enhance the habitat somewhat. And so I have the memo, and they're attached to, there's a copy for each of you, and then there's some slides here attached. We can also send it to you electronically if you'd like that as well, so I'm just going to pass these out. And that's all I have on my reports today.
Question? Doug?
Well, actually, you had asked for items. I don't know that's an item for a study session or a commission. I sent out an email, but I'm getting more and more complaints about the time that this Warner-Milne thing has taken to do. And I requested that Nancy give us a report on that. It's maybe one of our longest duration things.
I live with someone that every day says, so when is the never-ending project going to end?
Actually, tonight when I pulled out to come down for the meeting, they had opened it up to two-way traffic.
Wow.
It's not completely finished yet, but there is two-way traffic in Warner.
But the thing is, I think in general, this has been a very long operation, and
We need to understand it better.
Even we need to understand that better.
Yeah, I agree.
Doug, if I might inform you that I did confirm with Nancy, she's going to provide some details
Good.
and
The
an
next
update.
meeting.
Yeah.
Great.
That's great. The other thing, are we going to have an urban renewal commission meeting this month? September. Okay. Will it be the first meeting, or do you know?
I think we've got one scheduled for the 1st and the 18th, both.
Okay.
And I'm not sure if that's going to change or not, but
I'll send an email, and you may have something scheduled already. Okay.
Okay.
Good.
is that right, Nancy? It's the 1st and the 18th.
Definitely the 1st, and if it's the 15th, I believe, that is, if needed, on the 15th.
Okay. Do we have any other business to come before us?
Mayor, if I might, in my reports, I neglected to ask Tony if he wanted to comment at all on the work for David Evans, because you do get a lot of things to read, and so I thought if he could give you a verbal summary, it might help.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you. So the report, the memorandum that David Evans and Associates prepared, when I met with them, I asked them, and I provided them with the approved landscaping and grading plans for the Cove development for phases 1 and 2, which is primarily the infrastructure and esplanade development. And then that included removal and grading back of the steep slopes adjacent to Clackamas Cove and replanting those areas. So David Evans went in and they started with some findings concerning the existing conditions. They worked with Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife in trying to understand how the Clackamas Cove is functioning and how we could go about providing additional plantings if necessary to try and improve that habitat around the Cove area. What they did, they also did provide a shade analysis. What we find is that due to the size, the amount of water within the surface area of the Cove, you have obviously some shading provided around the perimeter of that resource, but because of how much surface area there is, the water temperatures get above 70 degrees during the summertime, which is not habitat for juvenile salmonids. The benefit that you see there is primarily in the spring and the winter. They would characterize the habitat, both in water and out of the water, as very, very limited. But there are options to improve that. And so what you'll see as you read through this memo is that they address the existing conditions, the discussions they had with ODF and W, recommendations that they would make for different types of plantings to be incorporated, specifically right at the water line. And then there's another section that deals with, because, as you may recall, the Cove development is staying above the ordinary high water mark, they've also provided recommendations should the city or we find another resource to go back in and what they would recommend for in-water work or below the ordinary high water mark that could create backwater estuary areas, man-made backwater estuary areas, or planted islands with shaded that could assist in providing better habitat within that resource. They've also gone through and provided some cross-sections of potential modifications to the grading plan. What they found was that several of those cottonwoods are within about 4 feet of the ordinary high water mark. When we approved the grading plan, they're actually staying 2 feet, approximately 2 feet above the designated adopted ordinary high water mark. So what they were talking about was to amend those grading plans, and you'll see those cross sections in the packet that I've just given you, to try and save some of those clumps of trees either at the ordinary high water mark or just above it. If this is something that we want to proceed with, what we're going to start running into is we are extremely close on the balanced cut and fill for the overall project. So in this case, what they're talking about by amending the grading plan is to not remove some fill that we were relying on to balance. They weren't taking out cut that we were relying on for fill that we were providing in other sites, other parts of the project. Until we actually look at the specifics of the grading plan, it may be feasible for portions of the site, but that would be something we would need to look into as we progress down this path. They also looked at the types of vegetation and plantings that were proposed, and overall they found them to be consistent with what you would find and appropriate. They did talk about some recommendations for maybe providing some alternative types of plantings along the ordinary high water mark and clumping the trees a little bit more. They did acknowledge that there are viewer corridors that are created through some of the central plaza and from some of the condo facilities that are located. They didn't find that to be inconsistent with what you're trying to create in terms of a riparian corridor, and that you could clump these additional plantings that could serve the same purpose while still maintaining view corridors. Though they may not be as large, they would still be there. They didn't find anything wrong with providing something like that.
Tony, if I might, if you turn to page 3 of the recommendations, and you look at the last 3 paragraphs, those sort of sum up the recommendations. One of these that I'm pleased to see in here is in that 3rd paragraph where it talks about more canopy trees are suggested, and that's an overall site design. And then the more specific kinds of plantings that Tony's referencing are in paragraphs 2 and 3 there. Well, actually, the next 2 paragraphs talks a little bit about some of the clumping and the grove concepts. Actually, I've discussed that with some of the commissioners that I visited the site with. And then also it talks a little bit about...
Who did you visit the site with? Which commissioners?
I walked down there with Commissioner Nacita, and I don't think we got that far that day, Doug. I think we just went along the riverfront. Also, I've walked down there with other citizens and members of the staff, as well as folks from David Evans. But then they also suggest some willows that might be planted. You see that, I think that's in the last paragraph there. Talks a little bit about some willows. So these are going to be relatively minor expenses for the developer, I believe, but they will add, I think, quite a bit of quality to the habitat. And I just want to thank Tony for his work on that and coordinating it with David Evans, and also to Commissioner Nacita for bringing it to my attention.
And if I may, just if you go to the first cross section, and in the bottom right corner, it'll say Section 1, and I'll kind of explain what you're looking at there. Starting at the bottom, you have a cross section of the existing conditions out on the site. And if you start at the bottom, you see it says maintain slope, regrade slope. And as you move up, there's a solid black line. That's what the proposed grading plan was approved as. As you move above that, you've got some pink, and then you've got some black dots. That's what's proposed by David Evans to save the cottonwoods that would be kind of in the gray-green right along the waterfront there. And then the dashed line that you see going up into the trees, that's the existing slope that's out there today. So then those green, larger trees that are placed would be the proposed riparian plantings that have been approved on the planting plans already. So in these cross-sections, they show what's been approved as the solid black line. The black dots would be what their recommendation for a modified grading plan, and then the black dashed line is what the existing condition of the slope is out there today. And so they provided 4 cross-sections showing how that could be accomplished. And I'd be happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Doug?
It's not really a question, but will you be emailing this out to the other members of the Urban Renewal Agency Commission? I would suggest doing so.
That was mine. I'll withdraw my request.
Yeah, because this is an urban
also
renewal
the developers
project.
as well. I think we just sent that to them today. didn't we?
Correct.
To who?
The PPS got a copy.
Yeah.
Yeah, we wanted
Oh,
them.
they
to-
have not seen it yet?
Yes,
They
they
have now.
received it electronically. Whether they've read it or not, I can't tell you, but we did want to do the courtesy of sharing it with them before we broadcast it.
Did they know this was being done?
Yes.
Okay. Jim?
I just want to commend Tony and David on this. David was incredibly responsive. I think this is one of the first conversations I had with you when you got hired.
We stole some of your ideas, too. I think we had to pay David Evans for some of it. That better not show up on the reimbursement.
But this makes me proud we hired David because he has indicated that he's been called Johnny Appleseed city manager in other cities he's worked in, and this to me demonstrates it.
Not one single apple tree here.
But this, I mean, being able to, I think I've said in the past that as someone who's trained in urban design and planning, I really find that there typically is a design solution to almost any kind of problem where you have the interaction of development and the environment, and that you can have win-win situations like having the shade and doing what you need to promote your development goals. And I think this is a really, just from the discussion, I'll go home and obviously read this very closely, but just from the way Tony's presented it, I think this is nifty, and I just thank you both very much.
Yep.
Thank you. It's nice having those cross-sections. That's really helpful to see the changes. I appreciate that. I assume there'll be a price tag to this as we go forward as well. And that will be assumed by the developer, I assume. So there needs to be some interaction and play there, right?
And their plans are, as you know, they're kind of going through some transition, looking for new partners, and there's movement there. I don't know what it's going to result in, but we're going to try to bring something forward that has sufficient, if not more, security for the city. But I'm very pleased that we got this work done now, because I was just chatting with Tony. The important thing for us is to make sure that it gets incorporated into the final product.
Right.
But, Mayor, you're right, because everything from the type of brick they use on some of the sidewalks or some of the planters or some of the infrastructure pieces that the developer is looking at, whether it's sloping instead of a retaining wall, those sorts of things. Our engineers are working with the developers on this, and sometimes we negotiate, sometimes we disagree. There are things that we feel strongly should stay. There are other things that actually, when they suggest them, if we think it'll be a better product, we negotiate on that. But there's several hundred thousand dollars worth of those kinds of discussions that are happening right now. Ultimately, the Urban Renewal Commission has to approve all of it. But
Thank you. Doug?
I'm not aware that Oregon City at this point has had any requests for Natures in the Neighborhood funds from the Open Space Program. Whether in fact some levels of match could be made from other places if it turns out this is a more expensive endeavor than we might think. So there might be other sources.
that's a good idea.
Okay. Other business to come before us, the work session, or discussion item? All right, then we are adjourned.